Folks, thanks for joining us for another On the Limb podcast segment of Whitetail Weekly with Caleb Currents and Luke Humphreys. Take it away, guys.
All right, thanks, Mike. I appreciate the introduction. So just me in the rack lab. That's what I'm calling my living room right now, as I'm sitting here working on this. So we come up with awesome concoctions to kill big deer. So it's officially the rack lab. But no, so today we're going to talk about phase 2 of e-scouting. If you listened prior, obviously, you know, we're big fans of onX here, you know, Nature's Voice Game Calls. It's pretty much all we use. I've used them exclusively for a long, long time. So we're going to kind of dive into the pre-rut stage, right? And what I'm calling the pre-rut stage is going to be typically, I don't know, second week of October to about the end of the first week in November, around in there. And that's honestly my favorite time to hunt. I think that is the biggest time, or the most patternable a buck will be, I will say, in the fall. Probably the biggest time where he is that predictable. Not gonna say he's easy to kill, because big bucks are not easy to kill, but he's as easy as he's gonna be, I guess. So let's break it down. So here we are. You can kind of see. So I've highlighted some quote-unquote food sources. These are just clear cuts. West Virginia, we don't really have a lot of food plots. We don't really have a lot of ag, but clear cuts kind of supplement that for us, or timber cuts, as some people may call them. Old strip mines, also super, super great. But we're going to talk about kind of what the deer are doing during that time frame, and kind of the terrain features to key in on and to move your cameras to anticipate for when those bucks take over. Right now, it's currently October 9th, and I've had my cameras out since October 1st, already ahead of the stage on where bucks are going to be, or where I anticipate bucks starting to check scrapes. That's going to be the big theme, is going to be scrapes. So with that being said, we'll dive into food sources and doe bedding. That's super important, obviously. Well, it may not be obvious, but obviously I do have these marked as food sources, but this can be a food plot. This can be, a ridge full of oaks. It can be ag. It can be timber cuts, whatever the case may be. But I've highlighted these food sources in brown, right? I used the little area tool on onX, and then you can see I also highlighted some white doe bedding areas. I marked them with a white doe symbol, and then I marked some orange scrapes above them, just to kind of paint that picture for you and kind of how it works. So obviously, we've got the food. We're going to have does. We're going to have deer. And does will typically bed closer to the food sources, right? So when does bed, they're going to be they're going to typically be at the closest security cover that they can get to from that food source, right? And I find like the happy medium being between like 50 to 250 yards roughly off that food source is kind of like the buffer, and is what I find is most typical for doe bedding. Not always, but for the majority of the does that might be hitting that food source, you've always got it's always consistent with regulars, and it's just like a restaurant, a diner down the street. You've got your regulars that, live close, are always in there. Kind of same thing with doe groups, right? It's not too far for them to get to. They feel safe at the house. They want to go out, get a bite to eat. They go out, hit these food sources. Well, bucks know that as well, and bucks key in on that. So some of the terrain features that we're going to talk about, I'm going to hit after, but we're going to talk about doe bedding in particular. So we'll say this is a great example. We'll say we've got a food plot or a timber cut, and then off the ends of this point, it's fairly close to that big food source. You'll find doe groups probably bedding on benches down below it, maybe in this bowl or this drain as well. But we'll just say that, we've been scouting in the early season. We always bump does off this point right here. So we know does bed there. So we're going to talk about, setting up mock scrapes downwind of those doe bedding areas. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Caleb, this is uphill. And I'm thinking for a morning set is kind of what I'm thinking about here. Now, mind you, access is super, super important right here, because ideally, if deer are feeding here at night, they're not bedded here. And as they come down from the hill above you, thermals are rising. If you're hunting this scrape, I don't want to be sitting right here when I'm hunting this scrape, because typically that means the deer is going to win me and I'm going to blow the spot up. So just kind of think about how you're going to access it. Maybe hunt the edge, come up from the bottom, hunt the edge. But you also have to be careful because, you don't want that ground scent, always traveling to those deer. So maybe setting it off to the side, hunting, a couple trails that kind of work to those scrapes. All things to think about. But regardless, these scrapes might be on this flat down below doe bedding, right? And that might be something that we want to key in on. But regardless of the time of day that you're hunting, think about the thermals. Are they rising or are they falling? If it's the evening, they're going to fall. If it's the morning, they're going to rise. Now, they won't start rising until the sun actually gets up and starts warming up. Typically, the hour before sunrise is the coldest, which means thermals are still pushing down. So keep that in mind as you access your stands. But I'm just going to key in on scrapes near doe bedding areas. So points above doe bedding areas or flats above doe bedding areas are super, super good. Off this flat, maybe in this bowl, right, close to food sources or in between food sources, getting in, hunting, scrapes, trying to set mock scrapes near those doe bedding areas are going to be super, super crucial, especially towards the latter part of that 2-3 week period I'm talking about. Especially like October, like 30th probably, in that last week of October, going to the first week in November. That's when you're really catching a lot of bucks cruising closer to the doe bedding areas because bucks are just getting ramped up, waiting on that first doe to come into heat. Now, with that being said, doe bedding areas are not the only way to kill big deer, and not the only place for mock scrapes. They're personally my favorite. If I'm hunting a deer, and the closer it gets to the second week in November, the closer I get to doe bedding areas. But if I'm hunting a deer mid-October, then I'm going to try and hunt big travel corridors. So some of my favorites are the tops of drains and saddles. Saddles are super big. So like right here is one that's super, super great. I will turn this on the topo so it's a little bit easier to see right here. So obviously we have a high point here, a high point here, and we've got a low gap in between. Don't mind these other pins. That was from the last segment, but bucks will wrap around these and then cross in these low gaps in between two high points or on a big ridge system, and it just funnels deer really, really well. So keep that in mind. Saddles are super, super popular for mock scrapes, and that's some of the stuff that I'm looking for. Now let me see if I can find a drainage top. All right, so right here's kind of one. We'll break out the topo again. So it's kind of steep along the hillside, but you can see kind of as it gradually widens and these lines get a little further apart, it's a little bit flatter. Typically in super, super steep terrain, there's typically at some point going to be a drainage top, or maybe it's at the bottom, somewhere where that levels out. But at the tops of these drains are great, cruising points for bucks, not only during the rut, but pre-rut, great spot for a scrape. So keep that in mind. That's also another big terrain feature that I'm going to hit on. So bottom line up front, what are bucks doing? Right, so bucks are transitioning. They're feeding on, on oak close to bedding. They're starting to get ramped up for the rut, wait for that first doe to come into estrus, and they start getting just more proactive on laying down sign. You're going to see a ton of rubs and a ton of new scrapes popping up, and that makes you all excited, and you should be excited, but think about why those scrapes are there. Some scrapes are better than others. If I can find a community scrape, that's really, really going to be a big hinge point, because typically that means there's a lot more deer using that scrape. So keep that in mind, but really focus on, doe bedding, close to food sources, hunting, upwind or downwind of that doe bedding, depending on, where they're bedding. Make sure you have bulletproof access, and then hunting saddles, like I mentioned over here, and then, drainage tops, like said right here. All right, especially as thermals are rising, I like to be higher on the mountain, and then if thermals are dropping, I like to be a little lower on the mountain, or maybe towards a lower food source and a scrape line there. So guys, make sure that if you haven't, please check out onX. Like I said, I exclusively use onX. It has been game changer in the way that I e-scout, and is my go-to for everything that I do digitally, scouting for mountain whitetails and public land whitetails. It's super great, and it's not just about hunt maps with onX. The cool thing is they have off-road maps if you're big into ATV riding and stuff. Maybe tell your friend about it, but they have their off-road maps, and then also have trout routes as well. So maybe you also like to fish, check into trout routes. And honestly, like, the guys over at onX are absolutely great. So please support them. Great company to be affiliated with. So, and we really push the product because we really use it. I have got a ton of pins. I don't want to zoom out and give up any of my spots, but I've got a ton of pins. So that's all I've got. So make sure you're focusing on flats, above and below doe bedding, edges of thick cover where does might be bedding. Focus on saddles and focus on drainage tops, and you will have a successful pre-rut phase whenever you go in to set your cameras, and you will see some great deer. All right. Thanks, guys.
This episode of On the Limb with Nature's Voice Game Calls is brought to you by Longspur Tracking and Outfitting. Longspur has 28 trackers covering 9 states: West Virginia, Ohio, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Illinois, and Iowa. Check them out for all your tracking needs on their Facebook page, or visit them at www.whitetaildeertracking.com. Or contact them today at 304-439-1659. Longspur Tracking and Outfitting, www.whitetaildeertracking.com or 304-439-1659. Contact them today.